And we are live. Thank you so much, Abu Bakr, for coming. Hello, everyone. My name is Ibrahim Al Ariqi, and I'm a principal machine learning engineer at Incorta. Welcome, everyone here who came to this live stream. I have with me Abu Bakr. He's an ML lead at Hugging Face. Really honored to have you on this live stream. Abu Bakr, let's start by with the first question. Why open source?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much again, Ibrahim, for having me here. Yeah, so I'm coming in from Hugging Face, and if there's one thing Hugging Face is known for, it's the open source machine learning community that we're very lucky to be part of, and I think right now a lot of people are thinking, what is the role of open source in machine learning right now, especially with a lot of these very compelling demos of GPT-4 Omni, of Gemini, these proprietary models. The question for a lot of customers, a lot of users might be, when should I use those closed source models? When should I use the multitude? So many open source models are being released almost every day. When should I use those models? And I would actually argue that there's kind of two obvious reasons why people talk about open source. One of them being that you can get really good performance and really good latency if you find a specialized open source model for your use case. And the other one people talk about is privacy. With proprietary models, you have to send your data to an API. With open source models, you can run them locally on your own devices, on your own VPC, and so you get a lot of privacy. I'm actually going to leave those two advantages aside of open source because I think those are talked about quite a bit, and I'll actually talk about some other reasons why you might want to use open source. So one big one is actually related to technical debt, actually. So let's say your team is using an open source machine learning model. So when I say open source models, what do I mean? I mean things like Llama, that was released by Meta. Those are models that you can run locally on your own infrastructure, or you can use them as APIs. With proprietary models, you can only use them as APIs. But with open source models, even if you start off using them as APIs, you have the option down the line of then running it locally on your own infrastructure.
Mhm.
And that's actually really important because uh, ultimately, when your volume becomes much higher, so when you're prototyping, use something via an API, it doesn't really matter too much. But when
Mhm.
your volume becomes higher, it becomes a lot more, it makes a lot more sense from a financial perspective, from a privacy perspective, from many other perspectives, to run things locally. And these models are not interchangeable. So you cannot just go from running, GPT-4 to Llama. Their behaviors are different. Their prompting is different. If you use things like, prompting or DSPy or various other ways to actually guide or steer these models, you're going to have technical debt if you start off with one model and then switch to another one. So if
Mhm.
you use an open source model, even from the beginning, even if you're using it as an API, you end up with just much more consistency, and you get reliable behavior. And there's other reasons to use open source models as well, such as reliability and flexibility and things like that. I'll talk about that more actually at the conference.
Oh, amazing. Yes, and I just want to remind our audience here that we have a conference in May 30th. And, if you want to learn more and more, Abu Bakr and a lot of other speakers will be there. But Abu Bakr, I just have one more follow up to your question, to your discussion is you mentioned private, and open source. People want to build their own private, Gen AI and private LLMs. But then, now, a few days ago with the release of GPT 4.0, the Omni one,
Yeah.
do you think the open source is able to catch up to the proprietary models?
I think so. Yeah. And here I do have to commend OpenAI for giving the machine learning community an impressive and I think compelling vision.
Mhm.
And they've been doing this for a while, with GPT-3 and GPT-4 and now with GPT-4 Omni. They But if you look at how the community, the machine learning community has developed, we have open source models that are equivalent of versions of GPT-4. We have things like the Cohere's Command R plus model. We have the Llama 370 billion model, the upcoming Llama 3 if 400 billion parameter model. And in many ways you can actually use these models in very interesting ways that you cannot use proprietary
Mhm.
models for as well. So for example, you have models that run entirely in the browser. This is actually really remarkable. You have and something like this is really only possible with open source models because again, you have the weights available, and so you can get them to run on GPU completely inside the browser. There's other kind of really cool things that you can do with open source models, when it comes to fine tuning them or understanding, interpretation. Like, why is the model making that answer? Why is the model making, behaving that way? If you have a mixture of experts model, you can understand what experts are contributing to that, which means that you can take steps to remedy if a model is making mistakes. So open source, you have these very, very nice advantages. And I think right now, OpenAI has impressed us with what they're doing. But I would think that it took a year for the open source community to kind of catch up with GPT-4. I think with the multimodality, with kind of the Omni, things are even more attainable, because the level of reasoning is not much higher than GPT-4. It might even be worse according to some people. But we just need to have the ability to process audio directly, which is kind of expensive data, but something that I think we can gather, especially as the open source community.
And I believe I saw the research recently actually that even with these private LLMs and with these open source ones, if it's fine tuned properly on the right data, it can actually sometimes catch up to the proprietary
Oh,
ones.
definitely. Oh, I mean, specialized models can do much better. In fact, you have this, like, for example, this excellent SQL coder model. So the SQL coder is like a 70 billion parameter model. It's from Defog AI, but it's very cool. It's open source, but it's much better than any other proprietary model at SQL, kind of generating SQL instructions. And it's faster to run because it's a relatively smaller model, 70 billion, as opposed to, like, I mean, we don't really know how big some of these proprietary models are. But specifically for SQL, if that's the task that your team is doing, then that's the model that you should use. And if again, you have all of the privacy benefits, you can run it locally or in your VPC or anything like that.
I see. Interesting. Okay, so a lot of models are out there, open source. Probably every week, as you mentioned, something is coming out, whether it's open source but proprietary. The thing is, a lot of problems come with these models when it comes to ethical concerns and security challenges. What do you think? What are the measures like for enterprises to implement to ensure such AI development and usage?
Yeah, so I would actually flip that question around. I would say that the proliferation of closed source models is what should concern us from an ethical and from a privacy perspective.
I see.
I think from a privacy perspective, it's very clear. Do you really want to be sending all of your data to a third party API? So you get much better privacy from open source LLMs that you can run locally. I think that's pretty clear. And even from an ethical perspective, I think closed source models should concern us. So what does closed source really mean? It means that a small group of people who are unelected, unaccountable, oftentimes unknown, they get to decide who uses machine learning and who doesn't, right? Who uses their services and who doesn't. And this should concern anybody who is interested in the freedom of knowledge. Like, we've had this debate many times in the software community, and the software community has come strictly in favor of open source. You have the famous, I think, Stuart Brand's famous statement, information wants to be free, right? Like, we favor open source for many different reasons. You can have many different eyes on it as well, and ensure the quality of it and things like that. And for a long time, by the way, this was the case in the machine learning community as well. Labs, even at Google and other industry labs, would always publish papers about how they trained the model. Sometimes they would release the model itself. Now, under this very dubious, like, guise of ethics, OpenAI and some of these other folks are changing the culture in machine learning. But I think if you ask me, and I think you ask a lot of people, this is just a guise. Like, OpenAI used to have a policy that they wouldn't work with the military. In January of this year, they quietly walked back that when it became clear that they could secure lucrative military contracts. So why should we let OpenAI decide who gets to use machine learning and who doesn't? I would much rather a world in which researchers and engineers can freely use these models and inspect these models, to better understand them and advance the field, than a small organization that isn't exactly known for being stable and drama-free and all of that. So.
I see. Interesting. Yeah. So I'll go a little bit back to the enterprise, or to the realm of enterprise. So with enterprise analytics, and generally, how do you think generative AI is transforming the way we do analytics and we leverage data?
Yeah, definitely.
And maybe if you can also provide some examples or use cases that you've seen people working on.
Sure. Yeah. I can speak a little bit from my experience at Hugging Face. So,
Mm.
Hugging Face, I'm sure kind of, many of the listeners are familiar with it, but we're kind of like we've been described as like the town hall of open source machine learning. Like you can find all of the resources that if you want to get started with open source models. Like,
And I also heard the GitHub. They say the GitHub of ML.
yeah, I would say it's kind of like almost like a crossover between the GitHub of ML and like the Twitter of ML. Yeah.
Okay, I see.
There's like social features as well, like there's discussions and things like that. And then there's also and tutorials and guides, and then there's also like the code and the artifacts and the models. So it's kind of like one place where you can find all of this stuff. But so our models and services are they're available for free for the open source community, but we also get a chance to work with many companies and enterprises through our we have this thing we call the Expert Acceleration Program, where we quickly get teams up to speed with the various open source solutions that are out there because the field is moving so quickly. And my favorite like recent example is probably a company called Write that we worked with. So it's a company that's building like these domain specific co-pilots specifically for life science professionals. So if you want to, if you're running clinical trials, you have to write up a lot of stuff and you have to complete a lot of forms and you have to answer questions over large volumes of documents. And my background from academia is actually machine learning and medicine. So this use case is really interesting to me. And this is an example where, privacy is very important. You don't want your in generally, you don't want your enterprise data going to third-party APIs, but especially if you're in life sciences. So Hugging Face has developed two very high-performing open source solutions. One is called TGI, Text Generation Inference, and one is called TEI, Text Embedding Inference. And you can kind of think of these as like drop-in replacements for OpenAI's services for LLMs and embeddings that you can run again locally on your own compute, on your own virtual private cloud. Depending on how your kind of cloud is set up or how your hardware is set up as within your enterprise. And I think it's like the fastest way. I would say it's the fastest way to run these open source models like Llama and Cohere and various embeddings such as those by Gina AI and others. And basically, the way that Write is using this is to generate like these co-pilots. Again, you have to submit clinical trials. You have to pull information from many different documents that you might have existing within your data warehouse or whatever it may be. So you can load everything, put that in the context, do RAG very easily. For example, you can create vector embeddings very easily, and then you can run LLMs that draw information from these documents and then kind of generate answers for you that are grounded again in real documents. So hallucinations are very low, and then again, just offer significant speed ups to your team as they use these kind of state-of-the-art models.
Yeah, amazing. I'm just thinking in the enterprise realm when we say especially for some users, they're business users. They love to interact with Gen AI. They have a lot of passion for to try and use Gen AI, but then maybe empowering them with these right tools, proprietary tools for their own data is very powerful. So
yeah,
completely agree. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think one thing is that this is such a rapidly evolving, I would say, landscape that again, we've talked about this before. New models are coming out all the time, and one of the nice things about things like TGI and TEI is that models are added there very fast. So we have a team that kind of is just making sure that whenever a new model comes out, immediately accessible. So if you're already a user of TGI and TEI, it just becomes so easy to use like the state-of-the-art model. So as soon as something comes out and has good performance, and actually one of the things I'll be talking about at the talk at No Limits is like how to even pick the right model. But once you have a model in mind, you can use it super easily for your use.
Exactly. And similarly here at Incorta, we do the same thing. We bring these models to the customers to choose from, and we guide them actually through the choosing process. So, well, Abu Bakr, man, this was amazing, an incredible session. Thank you so much for coming today, and thanks for the audience for being here until the end in this live stream. And I encourage everyone to come to our event on May 30th to listen to Abu Bakr. He's going to give a compelling and amazing session. He will talk more about these things, about open source, how to deploy it within the enterprise, And we will also have an amazing line of speakers as well. We have people from Gartner, Broadcom, Google Cloud, Victara, and many, many more. So would encourage everyone to come. With that, I leave you here. Thank you so much, and see you on May 30th.
Thank you, Ibrahim.
All right, bye.